We have so many heroes that we call saints in our Catholic tradition that truly put into practice what Jesus is speaking about in today's gospel, about not being afraid, of not allowing the opposition of others to get the best of you. One example I'd like to share with you is a very famous example of St. Teresa of Avila. She lived very many years ago as a Carmelite monastery. And in that monastery, she received the call of God to really reform, to change the way that the Carmelites were living at the time. They were becoming very, very lax in their religious practices. And as you know, when people institute change, when that change means letting go of our level of comfort, she faced a lot of opposition. Across the board, she was opposed, but that never stopped her. And apparently, in all this opposition, it came a point in her life where this famous incident happened to her, where she got thrown out of a convent in the middle of the night. It was raining, and she was in the back of this cart. Well, the donkey that was pulling the cart went into the ditch, and the cart turned over, and she was thrown into the mud. Just completely exasperated and frustrated, she turns to God in prayer and says, "God, if this is the way you treat your friends, no wonder you have so few of them." Think about that. But that was her prayer of exasperation. That is not what she lived. She was able to continue to go forth in spite of that opposition because of her relationship with God. She clung to that relationship. That relationship gave her the strength she needed, the conviction and the courage. She did not place or question her mission based on the opinions of others, based on their reaction. It was much deeper than that. She received this call from God to reform the Carmelites, and she lived it completely. So many of the saints throughout our church history did the same. We could go on and on explaining about them. But one of the things is we see in our first reading is Jeremiah had a very similar call from a very young age. He was called to confront the powers of the time, the powers of his nation that was in a very difficult time. They were at the point of being run over, the point of being invaded by a very powerful army. And so naturally, the leaders wanted to rally the troops, get everybody together, united, patriotic. Let's take on this enemy. Let's make treaties. But in the process, they forgot about placing their trust in God. That it's God that would deliver them, it's God that would free them. That was Jeremiah's message. Can you imagine how well that was received? No one received it well. All of the leaders were against him. The people also rose up against him. He received nothing but opposition, and that's his lament in today's first reading. But where did he find the strength to continue to go forward? To continue that mission that God gave to him, to call the people, to rally the troops in a sense, not focused only on the security and on alliances, but rather on God, that God will protect you. Place your complete trust in God and in God alone. That came out of his relationship with God. He says that in that reading. Lord, even though everyone is breathing murderous threats against me, I find my security, I cling to you. It's pretty powerful, isn't it? Jesus says, don't be afraid. Yet there's so many fears that we have in life. They can be fears, just the normal fears that we have of losing something or someone, fears of losing our health, fears of insecurity, uncertainty. There could be the fears of, if I truly live what the gospel is calling me to live, what about that opposition that we'll face? The way that people will think or act against us. What if in the course of the conversations that happen in everyday life, I were to bring my faith, I were to bring what the church teaches to light? In some circumstances, in some conversation, that's going to go over like a lead balloon. We will face opposition. What do we do with that fear? I believe there's three things that the scriptures bring out for us today. In a very special way, we need to understand what Jesus is saying is that those who oppose us, in the end, will not succeed. God's truth will succeed. God's love will succeed. The mission to which we are called, to give witness to the gospel, will succeed. So it's putting everything in context, because those that oppose the truth, those that oppose the teaching of Christ, will try to intimidate, use fear as a way of manipulation. But that's the second thing, is to understand not only will those that are focused on truth, are focused on lies, they'll in the end not win, but their power is limited. Jesus is saying that what can they do? They can kill the body, but they can't kill the soul. Their power is limited. Again, those that in our world that try to manipulate by fear and lies will make us believe that, no, they have the ultimate power, and that's not true. Our power comes from Christ. Our power comes from the truth that is revealed to us. And finally, Jesus is saying, where do we find that courage? Where do we find that strength? And it's like Jeremiah, and it's like St. Teresa of Avila. It comes to that relationship that we cling. It comes to Christ, who is the rock in which we base our lives. It comes, as Jesus says, to know that we are loved and we're held in the hands of God. Because God has that concern for that sparrow that in the eyes of the world has very little value, that God also cares for us and protects us in a very special way. And so the challenge for us is to grow into that relationship, growing into that clinging to God. Because when we're called to rearrange our priorities according to the gospel, when we're called to give witness to Christ and his teachings in our world, we will be opposed. When we face our own fears, our fears of change, the fears that to put Christ in the center of my life means to let go of these things, and certain things in our lives, and those things can frighten us. It comes back to these three things: to know that our opponents in the end will not succeed, that their power is limited, but Christ is not, and it's love and his compassion that holds us. And so in this liturgy, in this Eucharist, let us strive to put Christ again in the center of our lives, once again, so that all that we do flows from that relationship, to find ourselves in God's loving hands and God's loving embrace.